Welcome, everyone. I'm David Griffin, and today we're talking Jupiter's Legacy, the much anticipated new superhero series from Netflix based on the graphic novels from Mark Millar and Frank Quitely. To kick us off, here's a look at the first teaser for Jupiter's Legacy.
One day you're going to be stronger than anyone else in the world. Every evil you can imagine is going to rise up against mankind. And not for justice, for vengeance. You're gonna be the future.
Wow, that was awesome. We can't wait to see more footage from Jupiter's Legacy. So here to talk about it is Mark Millar and Josh Duhamel.
Thank you for having us.
Mark, well, many of us know the comic. There are some who are coming to it for the first time. Could you give us a breakdown of what the series is about and what you were trying to capture when you first wrote the comic?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for me, I wanted to do the greatest superhero story ever told. I thought if you're going to spend a couple of years of your life writing something, you might as well try and make it the best it can be. So I wanted to do Lord of the Rings for superheroes, something that had a giant ensemble cast over a huge amount of time, epic story that would just cost a fortune and take years to tell. And that was the bar I set for myself. Like, I'd had a lot of success at Marvel. I'd been at Marvel for 10 years. And I thought, oh, I need to do something that tops Marvel. There was something Shakespearean about it, leaving Marvel, getting off and then trying to do something better than anything that's ever been done at Marvel. So that was my bar. And I had a lot of influences. Like, I'd say an unusual one, my big one was Close Encounters. Like, you know, Richard Dreyfuss's character, like Roy Neary in Close Encounters. I loved that character. You know, a guy that just becomes obsessed with something and he goes off on this journey and nobody understands what the hell's going on except him. And even he is just following some voice in his head. And that is the fundamental of this. It's a guy in 1929 who loses everything in the Wall Street crash, but he loves America and he loves the idea of America. And in his dreams, he starts to get these hallucinations coming from this weird island that tells him how he can fix America. This island's not on any map, and he basically has to find this place that doesn't exist and assemble a team of friends who's going to come with him on this journey. So it's about a man obsessed with coming back and fixing the country that he loves. And then we cut to 100 years later when he's this superhero, this Superman guy that's been around for all this time, and he's kind of failed, which is the sadness of the story as well, because America is as riven with problems as it ever was in 1929, in some ways tougher problems. And he's looking at his children and he knows that ultimately they're never going to fix the world either. And he's at the end of his life. So he's kind of, you know, Hamlet and King Lear, as I said, you know, he's kind of both of these things. He's the man full of optimism at the beginning and a man full of regret at the end of his life. And that's what the story's about. It's basically a superhero who looks back in his life and he's failed.
And Josh, a similar question for people who are coming to this for the first time. Can you tell us about what drew you to the role and what do we need to know about Sheldon Sampson, aka the Utopian?
First of all, Mark, I think I'm hoping that that's mission accomplished, because when I first saw this, I was blown away at how epic the whole thing was, because it was over 100 years and it spanned from the 30s all the way to present day. And there was something there was just something so epic about it. I love the family dynamics. I love the dysfunction. And I love that he wasn't afraid to touch on things that were subversive, things that were a little bit, you know, taboo in some ways. And there was something about the fearlessness that this story had. And when I read it, when I first met with Stephen DeKnight back in, I don't know, would have been a couple of years ago now, I wasn't familiar with it until I saw I just had read the script and I loved the script. And then I go and I see this Jupiter Circle, I see Jupiter's Legacy, I see all these graphic novels sitting on the table, and I go, oh my God. I mean, I'm not real proud to admit this, but I didn't know much until I got to really sort of dig into it after I read the script. And it was sort of a love affair that happened over many months, and then leading up to shooting it, I was completely knowledgeable about the history of the story, and that's when I really started to understand how great this could be. And after seeing a little bit of it now, I'm really excited to show the world.
And Mark, we know that, the adaptation process, can be a complicated thing. It's one thing, of course, to have something, in comic book form, graphic novel form, and then moving from page to screen. Are there any things that you were looking to update or that might have taken on a new resonance in the last few years that you wanted to dig into a bit more with the Netflix series?
Well, it's funny, I started writing it in 2012, and we were just kind of coming out of the financial crash of 2008. People were just picking up again a little bit and everything. And I was drawing parallels with 1929. I just thought, well, this is when America collapsed before a near collapse. And, we looked as if we were heading towards, something similar when I started putting this together. And I actually was kind of worried, and that sounds ridiculous, that America would be at peace with itself a few years down the line and this story would be out of date. But the strangest thing is, the country's in as mad a state as it's ever been, and that's what this is about. It's shown the cyclical nature of history, the fact that we're always really just one bad policy decision away from complete fiscal collapse and everything, So the historical parallels of it is incredible. Even there's a whole sequence in episode 3 where they're talking about the Spanish flu, a few years prior to the economic collapse. And it's weird, it's like we're living in history again all over again. It's odd, it's kind of, I guess, these things never really go out of fashion.
And Josh, unlike a lot of superhero stories, this one takes place across 2 very different timelines. So, you're playing the same character, but you're playing your character, in 2 different, places in his life. So can you tell us about playing Sheldon in the past versus the present and how those 2 plot threads tie together?
Well, as an actor, this is the kind of material that you dream about. And that was, again, one of the things when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, I get to play this sort of young, ambitious, naive, and vulnerable dude who just went through a terrible tragedy within his family after seeing his father die in the worst possible way, and then go off on this journey where he, literally loses his mind and has these crazy visions. And that to me was really fun to play. It was period. It was a young, sort of naive version of Sheldon, and then to go, fast forward 100 years and to see what this time has done to him and the amount of pressure that he sort of had to carry on his shoulders for so long, and the weariness and the weight of that was something that was really fun to try to portray, as going back and forth from the 30s to this guy who's now so much more world weary than it was 100 years ago was a challenge, but also one of the most gratifying things I've ever had to take on.
From an actor's point of view, it's interesting because it's a bit like playing King Lear and Hamlet. You're the young prince and you're the wise old king and everything in this thing, And that's why I loved it being the same actor, because very early days we were wondering if the older characters would be played by older actors and everything. But I'm so glad we kept that connection, because you can see the same eyes, as a young naive guy and as a world weary guy. It really works. It gives it a real power, I think. And I think The Godfather's the comparison that I would have with it, really. It feels to me like The Godfather when I'm watching it. Like what Stephen DeKnight did, which was very clever, was the 2 books that I did, he sort of merged into one storyline. And what he did was had flashbacks and flash forwards using the Godfather 2 structure, where you saw the son's life and the father's life at the same age in parallel and what was happening to each of them. And it gives it such incredible weight. It's absolutely amazing. And to have the same excellent actors doing it, it just gave it that just little extra sizzle. And we were really lucky. I was on the phone to Josh last night and I was saying, there isn't a weak link in this thing. Like, in an ensemble cast, you're only as good as the worst person there, and they're all great. Like Josh, Ben Daniels, even the younger actors that come in have been amazing, like Elena and Ian have just been phenomenal. So it just really works. To me, it feels very like American cinema of the early 1970s, strangely. It just has that vibe of a Coppola or something, as opposed to a typical superhero blockbuster. And I've been so lucky. My first film ever was a big Angelina Jolie movie that made 5 times its budget, right? It's like, I was so lucky with my first film and coming out of Marvel and all that kind of stuff. I've never been associated ever with anything bad, right? I've always made sure I've sunk every project of mine that looks like it's going to be bad. Like I'll phone up the head of the studio and talk them into not making the thing because I hate the people involved or something like this, right? So I only want to be doing good things. And I think this is the best thing my name's ever been on. Like, I am so happy with this.
Josh, I want to go to you. You heard Mark touching on the scope of this. I know you've done some big projects, in your time, but from your perspective, how does Jupiter's Legacy differentiate itself from some of the other self-aware, sometimes darker superhero stories that we've seen over the past few years? I mean, like beyond the multiple timelines, what sets this series apart for you?
Well, I do think that there is a darkness to this too, which I love. I think it needed to have that. There's a weightiness about it. It's definitely a saga. This is a story that spans 100 years, and it feels, you can feel the weight of it. And for me, you're dealing with so many different things. I mean, from the mental health of this guy, he was seriously in a spiral for the first, for part of this thing, and to sort of become this larger than life superhero who I tried to play as grounded and as real as I could, who's not just a guy who's, carrying the weight, literally the weight of the world on his shoulders, but also dealing with simple things that any parent would deal with. This is a guy who's considered the most powerful guy in the world, and yet he doesn't know how to deal with his 18-year-old daughter. And I think that anybody who's a parent who has a son or a daughter could probably relate to that. And there's something, he actually goes to therapy to figure out how to deal with his own daughter. And this is a guy who can fly, who can do pretty much anything. So it's those interesting dynamics. It's the family dysfunction that I think is going to make this different than anything else that's been out there in this genre.
I was going to say, like, that angle on Superman, the Superman archetype we've never seen before. Like, what would it be like for Superman to try and have kids? And that was a basic idea for it when I first started doodling some stuff, which is Superman's always been able to control everything. He's always made sure to every problem. When it comes to matters of the heart, it doesn't matter if you can fly or have X-ray vision. It's not going to it doesn't make you necessarily a perfect parent. And then I was reading Carrie Fisher's book years ago. This is where a lot of the Chloe character came from. I was reading her book, and she was talking about how weird it was to have two really famous parents who everybody loved. And even though she was Princess Leia, she always felt inadequate because her dad was Eddie Fisher and her mum was Debbie Reynolds. And that, for a kid, that's incredible as a teenager. And even as Princess Leia, she felt, I'm not good enough. And to me, that was where the whole character of Chloe just formed. That relationship suddenly became very, very interesting to me, and I grew the whole story out of that.
Jas, you talk to us about the first time that you put on the costume. Talk about that experience for us.
Well, it's the first time I'd ever put on a suit like that, and talk about immediate transformation. It was like, whoa, this is what I look like with giant muscles. I've been trying to do this my whole life, and it's just like that. Look at me. So it was definitely, once you put that suit on, it's easy to fall into this character because you suddenly have this feeling of absolute power, and then you put with the prosthetics and the wig and the beard and the whole thing. It was like this crazy thing that I would go through, and it really does change your chemistry when you put that stuff on every day, and especially that first time. But the most depressing part about it is once you got to take it off, and then you're back to like, your deflated little self. So it was definitely an empowering thing putting it on, and a bit depressing at times when you take it off, because then you realize what you really look like.
Josh, I've got to ask, how did you go for a pee? Because the suit looked like it was all in one. Like, how did you get to the bathroom?
How to go to the bathroom?
Yeah. Like, if you needed a pee.
I mean, it was a process. I mean, you got to go in there. You got to take the outer sheath of it off, and you got to take the thing down. You got to hold, and then somebody's got to hold the suit behind you while you go. It's just, it's one of the most humbling experiences you could have, because you go from this guy that looks a certain way, but then you need somebody to help you go take a piss. It's just it's a complete contradiction.
So guys, I know the fans of Jupiter's Legacy are eager for more. Of course, we have our little teaser. We have the date. We know when it's coming out. So I'll watch it on May 7th, which is very exciting. But I heard you guys brought something with you that no one has seen before. These are some custom, never before seen sketches from Frank Quitely. who was the original illustrator of Jupiter's Legacy. He's one of my favorite illustrators, my favorite comic book artist. He's just fantastic. Mark, do you have anything to add some context about these images that we're seeing right now? Because this is like kind of a cool sneak peek into the show.
Okay, the first image here by Frank Quitely is three of the main characters. You've got Sheldon Sampson, the Utopian, played by Josh. Then you have Lady Liberty, played by Leslie Bibb, and then Ben Daniels as Brainwave. And these are the sort of three central characters, really, of the show. They've certainly the most screen time. And it's a husband and wife and brother. You know, so it's a classic kind of family structure, really, here, you know, so as drawn by Quitely. This is the disappointing son of the Utopian, you know, so like I say, this is like the kid who feels he can never live up to being Superman's son. And this is Andrew Horton, who's great. He's playing Brandon Sampson. This character is Blackstar, who's one of the big baddies. He's like in episode 1 and episode 8. You know, he's a big set piece in the show, and he's played by Tyler Mane, who's enormous. But from what I hear, a really gentle character. Like, one of my friends went to a football game with him about 15 years ago, and he said, "You know, this is really nice, but is there anywhere I could get some white wine?" And he said he was like so unlike what he expected, you know, he was like just this really quite urbane, you know, like actively type guy. But he's absolutely terrifying. I mean, in the fight scene, it's genuinely disturbing, and he's so properly mean. He's like a great comic book baddie, fantastic. And this is a wonderful picture of him here.
Well, guys, I really just want to thank you for joining us. Can't wait to see more of this. Teaser of the artwork. Thanks for sharing all that with us. Mark and Josh, wish you the best of luck going forward with the project. And everyone else, Jupiter's Legacy comes out on Netflix on May 7th. So be sure to check it out.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for having us. This was fun.